The Alliance Française of Edmonton respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community today.
Welcome everyone, thank you for listening. My name is Juliette, I work with the Alliance Française of Edmonton, and our guest today for La Nuit des Idées is Dr. Kim Tallbear. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for bringing me out in the cold.
Yes, we decided to take a stroll outside today, so you'll hear some background noises as we make our way down in the river valley, but that's part of the experience, right?
Yeah, beautiful out today.
It is beautiful. This is windy, but it is beautiful. La Nuit des Idées, as you may know, is an international event organized by the French Institute, and the idea is to talk and organize exhibits and dances and concerts about a common theme. This year's theme is close, and in Canada we chose to focus on the idea of closeness through new technologies. And the Dr. Tallbear here is kind of an expert on the subject. Would you say that?
I study the politics and culture of science and technology and its implications for Indigenous people.
That seems like a fascinating subject, very complex.
Yeah, but I'm not a scientist or an engineer, but I do work with them and I study them too. So I'm kind of like an anthropologist of science.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah.
La Nuit des Idées always happens at night, so we're walking down the river valley as the sun is setting, and we should be back to our starting point when it would be full nighttime. What do you think of the night? Are you more of a night owl, an early bird?
Yeah, I think by nature I'm a night owl. When I had my daughter, you don't sleep for a few years when you have a new baby, and I learned how to go on very little sleep, get up very early, so now I can do either. But when I'm allowed, like during the pandemic time, to work at home according to my own schedule, I'm up half the night. I mean, I got in the summertime to going to bed at 4 a.m. and then getting up at 11 and starting my day then. Yeah, so I think, yeah, definitely I'm a night person. It's just quieter and you can think better, I think.
To get back to the theme of this year, close, what does the word close means to you? Like, is there a picture that comes to mind?
Close? Interesting. Well, no, maybe not.
Maybe not right away. We can circle back to that later. That's all right.
I mean, I both like being close and I don't like being close. It depends on who it is. I'm very selective.
Only your close bubble.
Yeah, with what I get. Not even just in COVID times. I prefer fewer, deeper relationships to many more shallow ones. Although, because I do a lot of public speaking and a lot of media and podcasting, I do have kind of a many contacts at afar. But yeah, I think my it's both that and very close, tight-knit friends.
Very deep connection.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background? Where do you come from? How did you get here? What made you be so interested into technosciences and the link to Indigenous people?
Well, I'm a citizen of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate, and that's a Dakota people. It's a tribe and a reservation in eastern South Dakota and a little bit into North Dakota in the United States. I grew up on another Dakota reservation where everybody's relatives of people at my reservation, and I also grew up in part in Minneapolis and St. Paul, which is Dakota homelands before settlers pushed my ancestors out into what is now the Dakotas. So I grew up around both rural and urban Indigenous communities. And my mom was a tribal planner and a community planner. So I grew up around a lot of Native activists and artists and people into politics. So that really shaped, the things I'm interested in.
Of course, like community involvement since you were...
Yeah. We went to protests, we went to political events, campaign events, all kinds of stuff, ever since I was really small, and also cultural events, a lot of community cultural events. And then I became a planner as well, like my mother.
Can you explain a little bit more what's a planner?
A planner is, yeah. A community planner is somebody, you can work for any level of government, right? You can work for, there's local city planners, we have tribal planners, there are probably people that work for, the city of Edmonton that think about, there's all different kinds of planning. You can focus on transportation or housing or environment. I went and did a degree in environmental policy and planning, and so I ended up working for federal agencies in the US and national indigenous organizations and tribal governments from probably my early 20s to my early 30s. And that's where I got interested in science and technology stuff. So I was working for the US Environmental Protection Agency and Department of Energy with tribal environmental scientists from reservations near nuclear weapons production facilities. And they were very concerned about radioactive waste and the implications for sacred sites and traditional homelands of these nuclear weapons facilities. So there was a lot of science going on, right? And so very much they were interested in the intersections of science, technology, culture, and environment. And back in 2000, I ended up going to some meetings between the same tribal environmental scientists I worked with and Department of Energy and some other federal agencies. And the Department of Energy started started funding the mapping of the human genome. And all of these people from tribes around the US were sitting at a table. And, many of them were very concerned about that, but none of us had the basic genetic knowledge, right, to understand what the implications might be for us. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of fear because of the history of U.S. genocide against Indigenous people about bioweapons, and my sense was, well, we're not biologically distinct where they can just make a bioweapon to wipe out some people, but we needed to have those conversations, right? And so that's when I decided to go back and do a PhD to write the book that I wrote, Native American DNA, Tribal Belonging and the False Promise of Genetic Science. Because there was a lot of genetically essentialist, kind of biologically essentialist language in the conversations we were having with federal agencies and tribal representatives. And I wanted answers to those questions. So I had to go get a PhD because it was a completely different area than what I'd been in, right? So that's how I ended up doing a PhD. At the age of 32, I went back. And then I finished and I started a career as a professor, which I didn't intend to do. I thought that I would go back and work for tribes and federal agencies again. But I discovered I'm a better academic than I am a Fed, a government worker. So that's how I got into. And then that book and my dissertation really were, it was kind of an act of what I would call decolonial social science. I decided instead of scientists always studying Indigenous people, that I would be an Indigenous person who returned the gaze and studied scientists, because they give us trouble, right? They're always poking and prodding us and acting like we're the specimen under the microscope.
The one that has to be under observation.
Yeah. So that's how I got into that. And then I was at several universities in the US.
I was going to ask, did you start right away at the U of A? Or?
No. My first job was at Arizona State University near Phoenix, but I'm not a desert dweller. Oh. And my husband at the time was working, doing a long distance environmental consulting work for a tribe in California. And I got a postdoctoral fellowship at University of California, Berkeley. And so we moved there, and that turned into a job. But I really, really don't like California. Like, I'm a prairie person. Where I'm from in South Dakota looks like Saskatchewan. Looks like southern Saskatchewan.
So California was quite a bit of a change.
I don't like it. Too expensive. I don't care about the ocean. I like big, violent skies and thunderstorms. I like flat land. And I also want to be where there are Indigenous people in a visible number, like in Edmonton, right?
Yeah, in California, there wasn't such a big diversity, I think.
Not so visible, no. So my husband and I eventually ended up separating. We still work together. We're good friends. But he went to Virginia, where he got a job at the University of Virginia, and I went to Texas. But then I came up here because it took University of Alberta a few years to do the search and the procedure to hire me. And so I came here in 2015. So when we were walking down the stairs, there was a young woman running up the stairs, and she had powwow music on.
I heard.
That's why I'm here, because there's Native people everywhere. And I don't have to be the only one, like in California, where they'll be like, oh, you're Native, that's so cool. I hate that. I want to just be where we're regular people, where we're everywhere. Yeah. So I love Edmonton.
That's great. So do you have lots of links with the Indigenous community in Edmonton?
Well, through the University of Alberta. So, I mean, I'm a Dakota person, and there are some Dakota people in Canada, but moreover in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. But, you know, I teach at the University of Alberta in the Faculty of Native Studies, so everybody in there is Cree, Métis, Blackfoot. There's some Anishinaabe people too. And then there's a few of us from other communities around Canada and the US. So it's, you know, it's very, I feel very at home, even though they're not my people. They're prairie people. The cultures are similar enough. History of colonization is similar enough.
I was going to say there's a sense of common history through all that trauma, and
Yeah, there is. But it's also nice to be out of the United States, because even though Canada is very similar in many ways, I mean, the US is the global military bully, right? Like, it's not, you see US politics and hegemony much more clearly living even in Canada. And I'm happy to be out of the center of the US empire. You know, so it's like home, but it's in some ways it's kind of a relief to be farther from those politics.
I see. To circle back to your job, I was just going to say that as a kid, did you imagine that you were going to do something like that?
No.
What was your dream job as a kid?
Oh, well, I didn't have I mean, I don't know if most kids have more imagination, but I come from a community where, you know, my generation was the first to graduate university. Some people, not everybody, of course. So, and then later on, after we went, some of our, you know, my people in my mom's generation went to university when they were grown, but but we were the first ones, I think, in my generation to really, you know, finish 4-year degrees and go to graduate school. So I didn't have any models for, you know, certainly I never planned on being a professor. That never would have crossed my mind. I guess I thought I might go to law school or, you know, I don't know.
Maybe to keep going in that activist line.
Yeah, but being a planner, I mean, my mom was a planner. She didn't get a university degree, but she got into the profession without a degree. So that's why I did that, right? I knew what it was. It seemed like a way to give back. And, you know, it was something I understood. It was legible to me. But it wasn't, in the end, the right fit. But it put me on the path to where I did find the right thing for me, right?
And in that same line of questions, were there any difficulties to be the first generation to graduate?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulties are what all first-generation university students face. You don't have examples. You don't necessarily know how to make your way through the kind of class politics of the university. You know, and so of course I didn't have as much money as many of my friends, and I didn't have the support from my parents. My mom didn't have a lot of money. She had other kids to raise at home. You know, I kind of had to find a way to pay for everything myself, which back then was more possible than maybe now, you know. But yeah, I made some mistakes. It took me longer to get through because I kept transferring schools and, you know.
Were you transferring because you didn't know what you wanted to study, or?
You know, I guess I was always thinking, well, it might be like the grass is greener over there. Let me go try that. Oh no, let me go try that. Well, you put yourself behind when you do that, right? So, or also maybe I didn't have enough money at this place and I ended up moving, you know, somewhere else where my mom was living so I could live with her for a while so I could get more money to go to school. That, you know, most of these problems would have been solved with more money. So, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the new class launching at the faculty? I guess it's not so new anymore, but...
Well, we started last week. We just are in week 2. It's an undergraduate course called Indigenous Peoples and Technosciences. And so I'm aiming at that first year level. But we actually have... it's got an enrollment of 300. It's all online. It's asynchronous. Yeah. Plus room for 200 auditors. And the auditors that have been emailing me tend to be professionals in various sectors across Canadian society. So people working in government, some people maybe working in different corporations who have either have plants or facilities in Indigenous communities, or have relations with Indigenous communities, or people that work for them that are Indigenous. So people in professions that want to learn the basics of Indigenous people's history, but they have a particular interest in science and technology. So, and then I have a lot of traditional students as well. So, but that's been really interesting. We're eventually going to turn the course into a micro-credentialed course. So we will break the course up into 3 units, and you can take just 1 unit or all 3 for, say, continuing education kind of credit if you're a professional. So it'll do double duty. It'll be both a university class and a professional kind of development class. But the course is organized according to 3 or 4 roles that Indigenous people take up in relation to science and technology.
I was going to ask what is so particular or specific to Indigenous people and technologies?
Well, so for example, I look at the role of science and technology in the colonial project. Move over here. And so we have the first unit is on colonial science and the way that Indigenous people get treated as subjects or objects of science, which I was talking about, right? Yeah. And so a lot of that is looking at 19th century, early 20th century, but even today you have these really patronizing attitudes, say in Indian Health Service and medical care. If you look at the mainstream news stories, you see stories of some Indigenous person being mistreated in hospital in Winnipeg or, in Quebec, dying because it's assumed, they're drunk or they're an addict. When in reality, they're in there having some kind of crisis related to diabetes or a heart attack or something, right? And then they end up dying in the emergency room or dying in hospital. So yeah, that's the first part of the course deals with that kind of history, right? Mm-hmm. The role that science and medicine have played in colonialism. And then the second unit is looking at Indigenous peoples as collaborators in science and technology. So we've got some case studies in there. Indigenous people training as scientists, working collaboratively with genome researchers to do genome research that the community has asked for. Answering questions that are of interest to them, not questions that are just of interest to researchers.
Okay, so that have a personal not impact maybe, but interest.
Well, so they also benefit because historically in colonial science, Indigenous people were just the research subjects. The research was not meant to benefit them. Mm-hmm. They were like the lab rats, right? So now we're looking at moving into research that actually benefits Indigenous people and that they have some control over. And then we have a case study on green building. So there's a tribe in California that decided they wanted to do some sustainable building of houses. They ended up working collaboratively with architects and engineers at Berkeley. And in the process of that, they did a co-design process where people in the community, children, professionals, adults, elders, got together with all of these technical experts. And they ended up, because the community also had their own forms of technical expertise and cultural expertise, they wanted to use traditional building materials. How could those be worked into contemporary green building practices? Yeah. How should the homes be organized according to the way that Indigenous people actually live? Where are they going to store their supplies for canoes and basket weaving, that kind of thing? And the tribe ended up writing their own green building codes, because they discovered that the U.S. green building codes are very geared towards people in urban spaces and very geared towards this...
maybe not their kind of activity and way of...
Right. And these kind of normative families, and Indigenous peoples tend to live in different kinds of more extended multi-generational families. Mm-hmm. So multiple case studies like that show that suddenly we're using science and engineering and technology to do things that Indigenous peoples want to do, right? And then the third unit is looking at Indigenous peoples becoming scientists and moving into research roles, becoming science advisors. And so the whole course is looking at not only Western science, but also looking at Indigenous forms of science and traditional knowledge, and sort of showing that these can be used together in the same project, that there's not a hard line between traditional science and Western science. And so the course kind of sets out to bust a lot of the myths about what Indigenous peoples are and the roles that they can play in relationship to science and technology today. It doesn't only have to be science and technology that hurts them or exploits them, but they can actually turn it towards something advantageous in their communities.
I was going to ask, is there any specific type of science that is under a microscope, maybe biology or...
You mean in the class or...
Yeah, because science in general can be a very large subject.
Yeah, we have case studies on human population genetics. Mm-hmm. We have case studies on, as I said, the U.S. Green Building, which involves engineering and architecture and environmental sustainability. We've got a case study on where there's a guy from Guam who's a professor in Native Studies at the University of Minnesota who's bringing together Pacific navigators, Indigenous navigators and canoe builders, with navigators and canoe builders from the prairie tribes in Minnesota and who work on rivers. And so they're looking at canoe technologies, sailing technologies. They're working with a guy who does virtual reality at the University of Minnesota. Wow. Yeah, so all of these kind of interesting intersections, right? I'm trying to think what some of our other case studies are. Let me think. Oh, I've got some of the history of nutritional research as well. In food research in Canada. I wish I had my syllabus in front of me. So yeah, we do try to have different case studies with, and we also have a unit on Indigenous star knowledge, and there are also Indigenous astronomers. So we look at traditional star knowledge against sort of contemporary or Western science astronomy. And what's the conversation between those?
Study cases.
Yeah. We could do many more, right? If I had 3 semesters to do the course.
Of course. Is it only on one term?
Yeah.
Or maybe if it's so successful.
Oh, we will. We do plan on making it a regular course offering. Yeah.
What is your next goal? Do you have any sort of, not plan, but something ahead that you would like to do? Or
well, I've been thinking about that. So I went up for full professor this year. So that's the last stage in your professional career in the academy. I mean, because I don't plan on becoming an administrator, so I'll stay a professor. I've been thinking about that too, because I also made the decision this year that I'll probably stay at the University of Alberta for the rest of my career, as long as they'll have me. And that was kind of a big deal for me, because I've moved around a lot.
Yeah, that's what we're saying, that you like to move.
Yeah, so that was hard for me to make that decision, even though I'm very happy here. But, I'm not used to being so content. I'm used to moving on to the next thing. So it kind of freaked me out to decide to stay here. So then in the context of, okay, I'm here, now what's my goal if it's not to move on to the next bigger, better job, right? That's always what I've been doing. I think the thing is I want to figure out, I want to keep building this program, this Indigenous Science, Technology and Society program. My colleague Jessica Kolopenik and I, she's a citizen of Peguis First Nation in Manitoba, but she's also an assistant professor here, and she works on Indigenous science issues as well, but more from a Canadian perspective. We're building this program. We're going to build a cohort of 3 courses, probably a certificate in Indigenous Technoscience Studies, maybe in combination with the Faculty of Science. We work with other faculties on campus, and we're building these kind of research groups. We're thinking about, should we get more into podcasting and that kind of production? I think we're really emphasizing not only academic writing and academic symposia and outputs, but I'm very much geared towards speaking to the public. I mean, I have my own regular current events podcast, Media Indigena, with Rick Harp. He's our host and producer. I do a lot of other guest spots. I do a lot of media. I enjoy talking to the public about these issues. I think it's so valuable, right?
It is a very interesting subject.
Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out how to, and I already am centering that in my work. So a lot of what I do is about bridging the academy and different kinds of community. And that's what I'm going to really focus on, I think, in the rest of my career here.
Just maybe strengthen that.
Yeah. Strengthen the public side of the Indigenous science studies work that we're doing at the University of Alberta and the Faculty of Native Studies. And then, you know, I'm figuring out my own writing projects, which...
I was going to ask, is there another book in the future, maybe?
Well, this is what I'm thinking about. Do I want to write another book? Like, I mean, my book is still selling because it's still irrelevant. But I don't know, like, that wasn't a very fun process. So I just started a Substack. You know Substack?
I don't know what that is.
So Glenn Greenwald moved there after he resigned or got fired from The Intercept. So it's a place where a lot of independent media are now. Okay. And it's a paid newsletter format. And I have like 59,000 followers on Twitter. So they say it works well for people with a big following. So I'm thinking maybe I'll just do Substack and do essays on Substack. Some of it free content and some of it paid. And I reach the public immediately. Like, why? A book takes years to come out. And not everybody buys it, right? So, well, if you do an essay a week at 1,000 or 1,200 words, at the end of the year, you got a book.
That's true. Do you have some ideas on what you could write already?
Well, I already started the Substack, but I haven't started the essays. It's called Unsettle. And so everything I do, whether it's science and technology, I also study Indigenous sexualities. I've been writing a lot against U.S. empire recently. Everything I write about can go under this topic of unsettle or unsettling settler colonial narratives, values, and ideas, right? So that's what it's going to be about. So I just thought of my first topic. I'm going to go home and probably write the essay tonight. And it's about I think I'm going to call it, don't conflate the land with the state. So I'm going to talk about the way that we never, even Indigenous people do this too much, I think. And this is because colonizers came in, they changed the names of everything. They built up their cities. They removed Indigenous peoples. They cordoned things off into parks and districts. But we tend to conflate the land with the state. And so I really want people to begin detaching the land from the state. We need to think of this land and this space as something that preceded the state by millions of years and will be here when the state is passed away. And so I want us to focus on our relationships with the land, with our non-human relatives, with each other as relatives, and stop always focusing on the settler state. You know, I think it actually inhibits good relating to focus on the US, to focus on Canada, to focus on inclusion into a settler colonial state. We should be focusing on being good relatives to one another. And I think we'll be better at doing that if we focus on this place, absent that, all of that stuff, right? So anyway, I'm going to work that out in that essay. So that's a form of unsettling the idea that Canada or the US or any nation state is inevitable, that it always must be. And of course we see, you know, in the last 500 years, right? We see nation states all over the world rising, falling, transitioning, right? And so I really want us to pay closer attention to our planet and to being planetary relatives versus being citizens in a state.
Maybe more about the human than the nationality.
Human and non-humans. I think about non-human persons as relatives too, right? Because I also write against human centricity, against anthropocentrism. So, again, going back to the environmental stuff that I write about, right? Yeah. So, is that going to get us back up? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, it's quite a walk I took you on.
That's okay.
Especially with the coast, it's not ideal. Oh, what an adventure. Do you prefer the city in the daytime or the nighttime?
You know, I really, because of where I live, and I have a view of the, you know, whole south of the city and the river, I really prefer sunset and sunrise. And I love that dusk, that half, that like
in between type of moment.
And then the gorgeous, colorful lights in the sky. I'm really a sky person more than a land person, which is why I'm a prairie person. Like on the prairies, the really beautiful thing are the skies, and big skies. And so, yeah, I love the show that is the sky during a thunderstorm at sunset and sunrise. And yeah, I love that light.
Okay, so neither a preference for the day nor the night.
Right on the edge. Right on the edge of each one.
Right on the edge. I see. Well, I guess we can say goodbye. Okay. We're getting back to our starting point here soon.
Yeah, if we make it up this icy hill.
Thank you so much again for joining our podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
It was super interesting. Yes, definitely had you do some exercise. Had to go upstairs, climb on ice, but it was fun. And thank you all for listening. Don't forget to check out the rest of the program on the La Nuit des Idées website. And you have a good evening.